RStudio is the premier way to write R code. It is very user-friendly as it's super easy to set up, but it has also a lot of pretty advanced features. And in today's video I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite shortcuts and settings that I use in RStudio. In my code file you can see that I have included a code chunk. And as you can see, I have applied a dark theme. But more importantly, you can see that I use rainbow parentheses and rainbow indentations that make it really obvious how my indentations and my parentheses are structured. This is something I get asked all of the time, so let me show you that first. All you have to do is to open the tools menu and open the global options. And from there you can go into the code menu and then you can go into the display, and in there you can enable the rainbow parentheses at the bottom, and you can also set the indentation guides to fill. You could also use rainbow lines, and it looks a little bit different, but I personally prefer the fills. Personally, I feel like a darker theme is nicer for your eyes, so this is why in the appearance I have chosen a dark theme. In my case it's pastel on dark, but you can try out all kinds of other dark themes and also non-dark themes like this one here. And another thing that you can do, which sounds super mundane but I think is pretty helpful, is to just increase the font size. In a YouTube video like this I have to have a huge font because otherwise you cannot read it if you see this video on your phone. But I've come to realize that I actually like it if the font is larger, so this is why I suggest you do that too. But of course you don't have to crank it up as high as I do. I just leave it like that because then I don't have to remember to increase the font size when I do a recording. Another setting that I think is super convenient is to change the pane layout so that you have the console on your right. By default, RStudio will have the environment on the right, so that in the environment you can see your variables. But I personally think that it isn't as useful as the console, because if you want to see what is in your environment, you can always take a variable name and put it into the console and then also see what is in there. So this is why my go-to setting is to change the layout so that I have the console on the right, and that way I can maximize the useful space that I use in RStudio. That way I have on the left my file that I'm currently working on, and on the right I have the console if I need to make some one-off calculation. And finally, something that you should also definitely do in the settings is that you disable the automatically loading of the things that are saved into temporary files. So what I recommend to do is to take out this checkbox where it restores some data as RStudio starts up, and also it shouldn't even ask if it should save something, so this is why I set this to never. That way you can be sure that you start your new RStudio session with a clean slate and you don't have to worry about some variable name already existing. I know this doesn't sound super useful and it's just so convenient to have the data load from the last time, but I assure you at some point you will run into trouble because you forgot that, and then it's just a lot of work to figure out what went wrong. So this is why I recommend starting out with a clean slate so that you don't run into these problems. Alright, now let's get into the actual shortcuts. The first thing that I think you should learn is the shortcut for the pipe. In the tidyverse you use the pipe all the time and it just takes so much time to write out these special characters. I personally feel like it's much easier to just hit the shortcut and then you can just throw as many pipes as you want. And the nice thing is that RStudio will always put in white space in between these pipes. So even if you move your cursor to the front of the previous pipe, RStudio will make sure that there is white space surrounding that pipe. So all you have to do is to press Ctrl-Shift-M and then you can throw as many pipes as you want. In terms of executing code, there are two major shortcuts that you can use. Either you use Ctrl-Enter to execute one line of code. This will immediately execute the line of code where your cursor is currently at. But you will notice that I have executed this whole thing, even though it is technically more than one line. But in the end, these are all connected through the pipe, so this is why they are executed together. If you had another line here, let's just do a is equal to 2, then with Ctrl-Enter, you'd be able to execute the first part and then the second part. And you see here that all of this was calculated step by step. Or if you want to execute the whole code chunk, you can do Ctrl-Shift-Enter and then everything is executed at once. In R script, if you don't use quarter files, then you will execute the whole script. And in a pipe chain like this, if you want to execute separate parts from this, you can always just highlight the things that you want to execute and then press Ctrl-Enter and only that part is executed. So this makes it pretty easy to iterate through a couple of code chunks and a couple of code steps very easily without having to use your mouse to press anything. Also, another shortcut that I use all of the time is F1, which can help you to consult the documentation on the fly. For example, if I wonder what are the arguments for summarize, I can just click on summarize and then press F1, and I will immediately see the documentation for that function. In terms of code structure, you can always tab to indent something or shift tab to unindent something to go one level lower. If you want to say move this line upwards or downwards, you can just click on that line and then press Alt and an arrow key and just move things upwards and downwards that way. Similarly, you can highlight multiple lines and then use Alt and an arrow key to move up and down all of these lines. And something that I like to use every now and then is multiple cursors. If you press Alt and then use your arrow to click once and then drag it down, you actually have multiple cursors. So that way you could write something like mean underscore in front of all of this summary code that we have here. By the way, this is not a particularly nice way to program this, as it has a lot of code repetition, and in my upcoming data cleaning course I show you how to do better, but that's just a side note here. I really want to focus on the shortcuts. If you're interested in the data cleaning course, check out the link that should pop up right now. Cool, so now you have a couple of basic coding shortcuts, and one more thing that I like to do is to switch between the file and the console. And that's really easy with Control 1 and Control 2. Control 2 is the console, so I could be in my file here, write something and then wonder, how does that function behave? Press Control 2 and then I can immediately write there what I wanted to test out in the console. And then once I'm done there, I can just press Control 1 and put the code that I want into the file that I currently have opened. In terms of finding things, RStudio has a couple of cool shortcuts. One basic shortcut is Control F. In your file, you can just look for something, or if you want, you could also replace something. So if we wanted to replace this mean underscore, we could just highlight this and then press Control F. This one will be immediately put into my search bar. And then I can replace this with nothing. I will just get rid of all of this. And then I have removed the mean underscore. So with Control F, you can immediately search for something or even replace stuff. And even more powerful, with Control Shift F, you can look for things inside of your project. So if I wanted to find occasions where I used mutate, this will probably yield a whole lot of things. I can look through all of my files that are inside of my project. And if I click on that, then I can even open that up. So that's pretty neat. And one more shortcut that is even better is Control period. Period as in the dot that you put at the end of a sentence. If you hit that combination, then a menu opens and you can look not only for files, but also for functions. So imagine that I see a function that I wrote myself and I was wondering what's the exact code behind this. I could just look this up. For example, I could look for my print.table function, which I created in the last video. And then I could hit that and I will be immediately taken to that function. And similarly, I could also look for files. I could check, I don't know, what was my 36th video. This was the one about pies and donuts. And you see here that the quarter file immediately opened. So this 36th video, this kind of thing worked because I name all my files accordingly. But you get the idea. You will have to replace this with some other naming convention or some other file name that you're looking for. All right, cool. So let's bring this all together. Let's close the files that we currently open. And let me show you one shortcut that if you know it, then you don't have to remember any other shortcut, and that is Control Shift P. P as in command palette. In there, you can just write out things that you might want to do. For example, if I want to go to a file, I could just use that. And I see here that the shortcut for that is Control period. But if I don't want to remember that, I could just use Control Shift P to open the command palette and then type and go to file and function, press enter, and then I have the same functionality. I use this kind of thing for a situation where I did something, but I can't remember how to undo it. And for me personally, that is the expand all folds or the collapse all folds thing, because in quarter files you can collapse all of the things, and sometimes I press the shortcut for that by accident. And then I have to figure out, okay, how do I unexpand all of that? And then I just do Control Shift P, and then I see usually expand all folds among the last used commands, and then everything is unfolded for me. And also I like to use this for a couple of custom shortcuts from packages. For example, if I look into my file from here, we see that there is an additional indentation that doesn't make any sense there. So that is why I could use Control Shift P and then look for the styler package. And there I see the option to style an active file. It doesn't have a shortcut, so I couldn't run it via a shortcut. I'd have to set up RStudio to assign a shortcut to this, or I can just open the command palette and then hit the style active file action, and that way this thing is indented for me. Similarly, when I develop a Shiny app with the Golem framework, then I also use Ctrl-Shift-P all of the time to run the development version. This here would open the development file, but at the bottom you also see run dev.r, and it would then try to execute this. Right now this doesn't work because it says this isn't a Golem project, so obviously we don't want to do anything here. And the cool thing about Ctrl-Shift-P for the command palette is that it saves all of your last commands that you executed, and that way when you are currently in a Golem project and use run dev all of the time, then you can just do Ctrl-Shift-P and hit enter and your app restarts. It's a really convenient way to iterate through your app, and I personally enjoyed that a lot from the command palette. Oh, and I almost forgot another important one, which I use all of the time, in particular when I need to restart R, and that is Ctrl-Shift-F10. This will immediately restart your R session, and provided that you disable the automatic saving of data and reloading that data with a new R session, then you should start out with a clean slate and your environment should be empty, and then you could try running your code again and see if that solves your problem. And in combination with this session, I also use Ctrl-Alt-R to run all of my code chunks. So if you press Ctrl, Alt and R, then all your code chunks will run. Here we only have one code chunk, so let's just throw in something that actually does that. Not print hell, let's print hello. And then Ctrl, Alt, R will print everything. It will render the first code chunk and also the second one. So these were my settings in RStudio and also the shortcuts that I used the most. I probably forgot some shortcuts or cool settings, so feel free to drop them into the comments to tell me about the things that I missed. Don't forget to check out this video next, or check out my upcoming data cleaning course if you're interested in that. In any case, thank you for watching and I will see you next time.